Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We are now officially in the last session of the conference. The number of people that have responsibilities is getting less and less, but I'm very grateful to people that are with me up here to be part of this final panel, where our hope is to somewhat try to bring together many of the themes that have already been touched on, and hopefully do a bit of a deeper dive on some of those themes, just really through a dialogue between the five of us. And the title of this is very much about zooming out, looking at Africa as a continent. We've spent a lot of time on the first day looking specifically at Southern Africa, following on from the Treasure case study from 25 years ago. So we're going to just zoom out a little bit further here. Just to quickly mention, and welcome to those that have joined us online. I'm very grateful for this link up between OS Wildlife Week and the Effects of Oil on Wildlife Conference. So thank you for those that weren't able to be here in person, but are taking advantage of being with us via the live stream. So yeah, really appreciate that. And just to begin with some brief introductions, and I think most of the folks that are here, you've already heard from today, so I'll keep their introductions fairly brief. But I'd like to start in reverse order and thank Daniela Perez-Biso for being back on the stage after presentations in the last session. So Daniela, Senior Technical Advisor with CLARM. Monica Stassen, also somebody you've heard from this week, who's the Preparedness and Response Manager at SANCOB. Lauren Fiorenga, who's the Senior Technical Advisor at ITOF. And Tanya Augusto, who is both the industry chair of GIWACAF, which is the global initiative for West, Central and Southern Africa, and also senior advisor for ExxonMobil as well. So I will introduce Tanya in a moment, because in our exploration of this, we want to look at some case studies. So we are going to have a discussion, but we're actually going to share a few case studies as well. We'll extract some lessons learned from those case studies, how they apply to continuing to hopefully to advance preparedness within Africa, but also globally as well. And then we're going to have a discussion about that. But to really set the scene on this, I would like to invite Tanya to start with a presentation on GIWACAF, which is part of the global initiative, and just present a little bit on what that is. So just to introduce Tanya, because this is the first time we're hearing from Tanya in the conference today. So Tanya is the Regional Preparedness and Response Advisor for ExxonMobil. She's been with ExxonMobil for 19 years and has been a member of their Europe, Middle East and Africa response team since 2017. She's also the industry chair, as I mentioned, of GIWACAF, and has been a strong supporter, I would say, of wildlife response integration. She mentioned the exercise, but also regularly attending the Wildlife Preparedness and Response Community of Practice meetings and being on the steering committee for this conference as well. So we'll start with Tanya setting the scene with what's been happening from a GIWACAF perspective.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Paul, for the great introduction. Let me just say that this is my third EOW, and it's my first presentation. So, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited and honored. I will ask Lizzie to make some ugly faces if I say anything nonsense, because we are Portuguese speaking, and you cannot realize how difficult it is for non-English speaking to come on stage and do a presentation. So, Vivi, I'm counting on you. But anyway, so I'm here to talk about global initiatives for oil spill preparedness and response processes in general, and then I'll bring you to the regional global initiative for West, Central, and Southern Africa. So what are the stimulus of those global initiatives? This is a IMO, International Maritime Organization from United Nations, and IPICA, the Global Oil and Gas Association for Advancing Environment and Social Performance, stems from the PRC 1990 protocol or convention to call governmental authorities to work together with the industry and build those oil spill response capabilities in a national level, regional level, and international level. So, what about those global initiatives? So there are long-lasting, successful partnership between IMO and IPICA, as I mentioned, has actually been launched in Cape Town in 1996. IMO has a very good approach to regional cooperation to promote those bilateral and multilateral cooperation through existing frameworks in the region. So the main objective of this partnership between IMO and IPICA is really to support countries to ratify and implement international conventions and standards for oil spill response and preparedness, encourage and facilitate the development of oil pollution response capabilities, and then make sure that it can be a catalyst for cooperation between industry and governments. So those are the main three objectives of those global initiatives. Okay, who help us doing this? Who are our key partners? I mentioned about IMO, which set the grounds and the standards to liaise with government. The IPICA that brings oil and gas industry to the table. And then there are key other important supporting organizations like the IOPC funds, the ITOP. We have representatives from ITOP here, governments, local industry, NGO organizations, and existing regional agreements. Like we hear, I think it was yesterday or the day before, about the Benguela Current Convention. There is the Nairobi Convention. There is the Abidjan Convention. There is a lot of other agreements, regional and international, that we leverage to develop our activities throughout the world. Okay, so this is just to illustrate what are the main established initiative programs. So we have the OSPRI, that is the GI from Caspian Sea, Black Sea, and Central Eurasia. We have the WCAF, and again, the names don't always resembling what these organizations represent, but initially it was Waste and Central Africa, and then after several years, we just included the Southern Africa. So currently, GIOCAF looks at Waste, Central, and Southern Africa. And there are a lot of conversations to see if we can start to look at the other side of the coast of the continent. There is the sea, which is for the Southeast Asia. And recently, there is ongoing conversations between the GI to create or revamp Caribbean region GI. Okay, so I look at the international perspective of the GIs. Now I'm bringing you guys to a more regional focus of the initiative, which is the GI WCAF project. The region has 22 countries, members of the project. This region, we all know, there is a very dynamic oil and gas activities, and also an important navigation area to a lot of reasons, weather conditions, maritime security. So it's definitely a more active area related to the east side of the continent. It has been created, GIOCAF has been established in 2006. The main objectives is really to enhance capabilities of states to prepare for respond oil spills. We provide the GIOCAF project provide technical support for the countries to develop their readiness to respond to a spill through organizing workshops, providing training exercises, and also promote some regional conferences and interfaces between neighboring countries. GIOCAF is get his budget from IMO and IPICA through the 8 oil companies, as you can see from the from the bottom side of the slide. So we have Azul, BP, Chevron, Eni, Exxon, Shell, Renaissance, and Total Energy. And the countries, you can also see on the map the 22 countries member of the GI project. Okay, how we do it, how we interact with the governments and industry. So we have a three-step approach, kind of aligned with the general GIs, which is help the countries to establish legislation and regulation framework for oil spill preparedness and response on a national level. Then on the next step, we help the states to implement those legislations, like operationalizing those legislations through policies, procedures, operating procedures, so then to make sure that they can operationalize those legislations. And last but not the least is really to look at the cross-functional aspects, transborder cooperation, develop procedures to facilitate international assistance. Okay, so what are the ways we kind of achieve those steps? We have four main pillars to develop our activities. The first one is have a real established methods and tools to deal with the governments, like standard procedures, use IPCA guidelines, so then we can have a common approach throughout the 22 countries. Then on second step, we work close to the countries, either in person or online or virtually. We do workshops, we do training, we do exercises, and we invite our international technical partners like IPTOF, OSRL, to kind of help us to build those capabilities in a national level. Then we also use a lot of communication and networking. This conference, EOW, is one of the ways for GI to publicize and raise awareness on what are we doing, where are we, how we can continue to collaborate. We do also have our website, which have a lot of our activities and processes. And one of the good things about GIOCAF, and it has been mentioned in some of the previous slides, about language. So working with 22 countries that talk different language, so we try to cover all the language, like Portuguese, French, English, and make sure that whatever we're passing on, and we would like the message to be clear to everyone. Okay. We also have our networking meetings and arrangements, either with national delegate focal points or the industry focal points. We have regular online meetings, so then we can make sure that whatever the project is doing is aligned with the expectations from national delegates and industry focal points. Then on the fourth step, we do also regional conferences. Every 2 years, so I forgot to mention that our program is a cycle of 2 years. So we have a work plan for 2 years, and at the end of a specific cycle, we do a conference. And I will talk a little bit about more about what what are the objectives of those regional conferences. So it's definitely review the progress of the program activities, facilitate information sharing and lessons learned, address the challenges of oil spill preparedness and response within the region, strengthen the network between government delegates involved on oil spill preparedness, and also assess how GIOCAF should involve better to provide support. It's only easy when we are all together and we can kind of assess and understand what are the improvement areas that we need to work on to better support the region. And at the end, with all those lessons learned, sharing of concerns, we determine the priority of the next 2 years. So then we build a plan for the next 2 years for the next conference. Okay. So we have realized or conducted 10 conferences in different of the countries members, which help us to kind of be diverse and make sure that everybody is involved on the process of setting the priorities, sharing lessons learned, and show how they progress on their countries on the oil spill response and preparedness. Okay, so it's not just about oil spill. Despite the fact that wildlife response in the region is very limited and non-well aware, but GICAF tried to put on the agenda of the conferences, country requests, the topic of wildlife response. Here are just a few examples of activities that GICAF facilitated to include wildlife response. For example, the 2019 conference in South Africa, we had a field visit that we took the delegates and the focal points to visit the Sankop Rehabilitation Center. And it was amazing how they were surprised what efforts it can take to protect and respond to a wildlife situation. Then in 2023, we got a request from Nigeria government to help them build their own wildlife response contingency plan. And I will leave this to Lauren to talk a little bit about this topic. And on 2024 conference last year, we make sure that we had on the agenda a workshop focus on wildlife response, and also on the tabletop that we use the C-Alarm gaming system, we included wildlife response focus, so then delegates and participants will be thinking on what would be the objectives and the strategies to protect wildlife and respond to all wildlife. So this is what GICAF does to kind of build the preparedness in the region with all the limitations, either from geographical, political situation, socio-economic situations, but this is what GICAF in a respectful manner works with governments to help them build their capabilities as per their priorities. So my next slide is my second last, and I want you guys to bear in mind this slide, because it will set the stage for the panel discussion or questions that we'll have right after. So this is just a picture of oil and gas outlook in the sub-Saharan Africa. So where, if you can see the top left map, it shows the current activities, which is heavily concentrated on the Western Central Africa. Okay, this is what's happening today. So if you look at the right top map, you just see the outlook or the forecast for the upcoming 15 years oil and gas activity. And just to say that with the oil and gas activity or upstream, midstream operations, it brings the shipping, the maritime shipping activity, because crude needs to be moved around, and so it will increase also maritime activity in the region. And the bottom middle graph is just a combination, and I just keep this one so we can see how busy the region will be for the upcoming years. So with that, we can see that there will be an increase on the oil spill risks. So the profile in the region will increase, despite with the low probability, as we hear throughout those 3 days, it happening less and less, but we know if it happens, it can be significant and major. So we need to make sure we continue to prepare and be ready to respond if it happens. Okay, so now in conclusion, so GI will continue to do the technical support to the governments in the light of the IPC convention, and continuing to enhance the capabilities of the states or governments to prepare and work with the industry on the spill response. And it is not just oil. We're also starting to look at HNS spills. We had a lot of some of the workshops talking about non-oil spills that are already in a rise on the risk. and also to encourage cooperation between industry and governments. So we will be here constantly adapting to the new challenges in the region, so the high oil risk, the sub-region protocols, and oil spill preparedness and technology. We will be continuing helping the governments to build their capabilities. So my last phrase, and if we count, probably communication, collaboration, cooperation have been said throughout the week many times, but is the key. Is the key. Communication at national level, regional level, international level will put us on a better position to cooperate in a spill situation. And when I say communication, language can be a barrier. And we need to make sure we start to build those relationships ahead in a peacetime, so then we can understand each other on the real event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. That really sets the scene, and at least regionally, it shows us some of the efforts that are ongoing in the linkage between oil spill preparedness and wildlife response preparedness. What we're going to do now is take a little tour around the continent, and we're going to start with West Africa because Tanya already alluded to it, that Lauren and Monica were involved in some activities in Nigeria. So we're going to start in West Africa, and we're going to work our way around. Actually, we're going to go counterclockwise, but Lauren, I'll to that. You go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so Tanya already mentioned this particular case study that we wanted to highlight in this panel. So in 2023, Monica and I, representing SANCOP and ITOF, undertook a workshop looking at oiled wildlife preparedness and looking specifically at getting a oiled wildlife contingency plan for Nigeria. This came at the request of the government of Nigeria and was facilitated by GI WACAF. I had a little look in preparing the slide at kind of the history, trying to dig through where this sort of came from, where this ask comes from. And there was quite a big spill in 2011. And we saw that actually previous to anyone on this panel's time in our organizations, there was a GI WACAF preparedness workshop following that spill. And we will talk more a little bit about that and the fact that incidents often instigate workshops and preparedness and an idea of identifying gaps. But there clearly was an incident that was quite big. It identified gaps, and there was a workshop of which oiled wildlife was a section of. And then fast forward about 10 years later, we have our oiled wildlife contingency planning workshop. So it was very successful. It was involved a lot of stakeholders at the workshop, I think, and I believe there is a draft version of that Monica has seen. So there's progress, but we haven't yet got to being published or anything like that. So that was just a zoomed-in example Tanya was mentioning.
Thank you, Lauren. So we'll stick with West Africa, and then we'll keep moving on.
Yeah, so still in West Africa, but covering 3 countries of Mauritania, Senegal, and the Gambia. So our first engagement as SANCOP was actually in 2023, where myself and my colleague Nikki went to Mauritania to do a feasibility assessment for oiled wildlife response for Shell. They were about to do some drilling, and they just wanted to know what it would be like in a country that has absolutely zero wildlife preparedness and very little oil spill preparedness in general. It was a really educational exercise, an eye-opening exercise into cultural differences, language barriers, and perceptions around wildlife response in countries that wildlife isn't a priority. But it kickstarted some really good discussions, specifically with the NGO, one of the NGOs that was based there. It didn't progress much further than the recommendations that we made, and we'll chat more why later. But 2 years later, we landed a contract under the UK government's Ocean Country Partnership Protection Programme to host a workshop that aimed to draft a sub-regional oiled wildlife response plan. And this again was trying to close quite a very big gap. Most countries cannot develop their own contingency plans. They just don't have the money and the resources. But we thought if we could take a more regional level, that might kickstart countries to look internally at their own level. So that was a large portion of the first bit of this year. We hosted the workshop, we've drafted the plan, and we're hoping now that it'll proceed into that finalization phase at each of the countries' levels. And to address the language thing, the plan was translated into French, as well. I did not do that. We had other people do that. But yeah, I'll leave some food. And the image in the bottom right-hand corner is just to show you the exploration activities that are happening in both countries. It's quite a hot spot for current existing operations and exploration activities. Oh, it's me again. So going straight down to Southern Africa, and I'll keep this brief because we've touched a lot on South Africa and a lot on Namibia. You can just, I did actually automate it. So this is just highlighting some of the progress that has happened in these countries. And I cover both South Africa and touch briefly on Namibia because there was a great presentation about what's happened in Namibia earlier this week. And really just the development of a national wildlife contingency plan that we would love to see finalized. The stockpiling of equipment in Cape Town and Gqeberha for seabird response, development of all wildlife colony kits, basic kits at some of our key African penguin colonies, a team for seabirds, facilities, and most recently a trailer for seabird response. And I say seabird response because it's very specific to that species. And then you can again. On the Namibia side, and this was also, they've developed a draft wildlife contingency plan. Some equipment stockpiles have already been sourced and some are currently underway. Some training has been done, colony kits have been developed. But I picked these two examples because a lot of this involves stakeholders coming together. It was not just government, there was a heavy involvement in the context of Namibia with SANCOB and with industry, Namdeb de Marine Foundation having to come in and provide some funding. And then in the South African context, some of our training and plans were funded through industry as well as organizations such as the Benguela Current Convention or AZA Safe out of the US funding equipment. So it was sort of this really stakeholders coming together to boost and try and improve wildlife preparedness in the region.
Back over to me. So we're going to move around just to highlight some of the activities that have gone on recently in East Africa. This region has been consistently active, but we've seen an increase in the momentum in oil spill preparedness in this region. And that's primarily been driven through the Indian Ocean Commission, as well as the Nairobi Convention. So we're seeing a bit of an uptick. And if you go back to Tanya's beautiful maps, and you can see the predicted offshore activity and therefore the marine traffic, this might be fueling a little bit of that conversation. So we're seeing that East, it's got lower preparedness when you compare it to quite a robust GI WACAF system. And as you know, we don't have a GI yet that reaches up the East, but we are seeing through these main organizations, through these regional collaborations, that we are getting a little bit more activity on this side. So watch that space.
My turn. North Africa. So we've got 5 countries there: Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt. And all countries are contracting parties to the Barcelona Convention. So they've got REMPEC assisting them in preparedness and response when needed. REMPEC is an IMO organization. And as I mentioned in my talk before, CLARM has got an MOU with REMPEC to support those countries that are needing response and preparedness on wildlife response. So CLARM, again, linked to EUROA. And also there is the Mediterranean strategy and their action plan as well, where wildlife, it is mentioned. So the Mediterranean strategy talks about integration of wildlife in a holistic and integrated approach to oil spill preparedness and response. So we did put some pressure there from CLARM to have that wording and also to have that last sentence that all wildlife response should be integrated in that framework. Also, the action plan includes training. So there are in the CSO1, the objective 1, it is mentioned that countries should be increasing their knowledge in different aspects of oil spill response and preparedness. And one of the topics is oil wildlife preparedness. So framework is there, not much done. But according to our country profiles, none of the countries have got a plan. None of the countries have done much on preparedness. However, while we do those country profiles, we contact stakeholders in the countries, 3 of them, there are 5 of them, and 2 of them recently, we've contacted them this year, and we see potential. We see organizations that are interested in wildlife response, and they are just lacking that connection with the authorities, with the whole structure of the oil spill response. So we need to push a little bit there to get them going. Projects in 2010, a long time ago, CLM collaborated with an oil industry, an energy company, to do an exercise where the wildlife component was included. Also in Libya, we did a planning project and we drafted a wildlife procedure. Again, that procedure was done in 2013 and it was done remotely because of safety issues. So that's also something we are going to talk later about safety in Africa. So we couldn't go into country, but something was drafted. But again, on the shelf. POSOF, European project, POSOF 1 and POSOF 2. So we know that we have trained on a basic level on wildlife response, some volunteers on 5 of them, of those countries. But again, long time ago, and they were just volunteers, so we cannot expect anything from that. And then there was Mapoko project from 2019 and 2020. We developed what we called a self-assessment tool. So all the countries from the Mediterranean region that are binded to the protocol, to the Barcelona Convention, can have this tool to complete a self-assessment on how much they are prepared on wildlife. Some of those countries have done that assessment tool, scoring not very good, but at least they did it, and which is good. The self-assessment tool is still a tool that we are promoting in the Barcelona Convention and the REMPEC meetings. We encourage all those countries to keep completing it so that they can track how much they are improving or not. Again, as much as we can do. I mean, it's each country's voluntarily willingness to do things, and we keep poking them, but there's so much we can do.
Great, thank you very much. Just really good to just paint a bit of a picture of just some of the initiatives that have been happening, some of the developments out there in the wider region. So we're going to tackle a few different themes here, and I think in terms of that risk landscape, it has been touched on a few different times through the conference. So in the time we have, we'll try to get really into the nuts and bolts of this. But maybe Lauren, if I come to you first. So there is a changing risk landscape, and I think it's safe to say that it's creating challenges just for oil spill preparedness in general. So what are the implications? What is that risk landscape? Maybe just to summarize, but also what are the implications or the challenges then for trying to make headway or to prepare from a wildlife perspective? And are there regional differences in terms of maybe that risk landscape and how it has an impact?
Okay, thank you. I do think we've covered this in a few different ways throughout the week, but for those of us who are joining on the live stream and perhaps haven't had the opportunity, I will just reiterate all of the themes that we've spoken about, which is the vessel rerouting. And if you don't mind just going through to the next slide, just to illustrate, you can see that through Red Sea security issues, we've got this vessel rerouting around the Cape. So we've got more traffic coming around, and that obviously just by pure numbers increases the risk, right? We've also got climate change and weather-driven events. So again, last year in South Africa, there were a spate of incidents that were happening in the winter here, bad weather, inexperienced crews, more vessel traffic, congested shipping lanes. It increases the risks, right? And so we're seeing that concentrated around the Cape per se, but it's also going to affect East and West. We also mentioned the dark fleet, and that's the alternate fleet. It's about 10%, they think, of the world's tankers at the moment that are shipping sanctioned cargo or calling at sanctioned ports. They don't operate within the international compensation regimes. So if an incident occurs involving one of these vessels, it's going to be a lot harder for cost recovery with this vessel. And that, again, increases the risk. And we are no strangers in this room to difficulty of funding. So that's another risk factor. And I wouldn't be representing ITOF if I didn't mention compensation and compensation regimes in particular. So we do have, since the 70s, we've got these international conventions that help to dictate where compensation is, you can get it from, how much you can get, and what's covered, right? It's been since the 70s, it's very well established. But with these alternate fuels, we don't have the same robustness in our legislation, if any robustness. So we have the HNS Convention that's hopefully coming into force, and South Africa is one of the countries that has ratified this, but it is not yet in force. It needs a few more countries to sign on to reach the minimum requirement. So we're looking at 5 to 10 years best case. When that is in force, it will cover impacts from HNS, hazardous noxious substances, as cargo. It will not cover, currently in its form, HNS substances as fuel. So when we're talking about using ammonia, when we're talking about using hydrogen as fuel and having an incident and having impacts arise from that, there is currently no legislation that will allow us to progress that quickly and have a clear route of compensation. So that is a significant risk factor. And especially when you look at the Cape and you look at the vessel traffic here, we've got a lot of container vessels coming around, right? So the other pollutants, and we've seen this with plastic pellets in South Africa, the risk of other pollutants that are not covered by any international conventions is there. We've seen it happen already, and the risk is not decreasing. I think that's it for me.
Did you want to mention this other slide as well?
So of plastic pellets, this is just a graph. The confirmed ship source plastic pellet spills we've had since about, I think 2012 is the earliest recorded one. There probably were ones before that. So you can kind of see a few hotspots in some of the shipping lanes. But yes, South Africa has had quite a few incidents. And as you can see, because of the different currents, the plastic pellets get spread very, very quickly over a very, very wide area. So large stretches of this coastline can become contaminated very quickly.
Thank you, Lauren. Tanya, do you want to just add to that? And I'm just thinking about the focus that a lot of countries are going to have on some of these new risks, and how can, wildlife make sure it sort of gets incorporated into some of that thinking. But anything you just want to share in that risk landscape context?
Yeah, so Laura mentioned those climate, marine shipping activities. So I will keep looking at oil and gas activities that will continue. Unfortunately, despite the global energy transition around the globe, we are getting there, but we still relying our in our industry. So there are a lot of still projects and operations on upstream, midstream, on relying on oil. So it will continue to be a high profile risk for oil spills. So related to how we make sure that the oil spill response and wildlife preparedness kind of increases along with the risk is really those types of global initiatives and regional collaboration and cooperation, boots on the ground, make sure we involve the local communities to understand the risks and the disadvantages of having a coast being affected by oil or any other type of chemical product, and keep the conversation. And we saw on some of the GAO's presentation, mobilizing people to our risky places and also safety. And even some of those beaches are not really accessible. So those are some of the challenge that the wildlife response teams need to face to kind of be ready to respond and prepared to respond.
Thank you. Yeah, so it gives us a lot of challenges to think about, but it sets the scene in terms of risk. The other challenge, when we think, I guess, about the continent as a whole, is one, the diversity of species, and also just the context. I think about inland versus marine spills as well. Anything you want to share on that? Because obviously that's another key piece of the jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, some of you would attend the presentation earlier. Specifically showed that the bulk of the spills we do see are marine-based spills, and that's obviously where our focus is going to be. And we get quite comfortable with with how we respond, how we tackle seabirds, how we handle them. But there are other incidents that can happen, and we know from other examples within Africa that there's other species that can be affected. And I remember a discussion where someone said to me, "Oh, well, we could get camels oiled. How would you handle that?" I've never actually had that question posed to me before. How would you wash a camel? But it was a valid question, and we started unpacking some of those things in some of the assessments we did, and then things like crocodiles start coming up, and now you're starting to move into the realm of dangerous species from a human point of view as well, and that creates another layer of complexity. Is, where do you draw the line between we actually can't versus this maybe sacred crocodile or something that people view in a specific light? So, seabirds, I found in some of the trips that we went on, hold a very low priority ranking, and mammals and other things are much more important, and that's what they want to save. Even when you tell them rehabilitating a whale is going to be impossible, their mind goes there because it's a tourism or it's a value attractor. So you kind of have to learn to understand the context of the region and the people you're speaking to first, before you can just straight out of there say yes or no.
Daniel, you want to add to that?
I'm asked to do it, right? The strategy is definitely, different species, different strategies, and we guys are talking all the time about bird, animal, marine mammals, marine animals, marine birds, but what about any inland species? So they've got different protocols, and the strategies might be completely different. And we were talking yesterday, I think it was, in the hazing and deterrence session, how important that is. So inland spills, we might be relying on primary and secondary strategies, because the tertiary strategies, so capture and rehabilitation, might not even be possible. And to add to that, I think the close. Okay, that's what I was doing. And to add to that, what was I going to say? The local knowledge, I think, is key in those aspects as well. So the strategies and the protocols that you will need to follow. I don't think tier 3 expertise will have all the knowledge about each individual species that we might find inland. So, and especially in Africa with that range of biodiversity. So I think the local knowledge, the rangers, they will know how to deal with a hippopotamus. They will know how to sedate it, how to, I don't know. And then the resources as well. Do we have resources to respond inland? It's a big question. How do we get there? And I was thinking the other day as well, when we talk inland, if we talk shoreline, we are talking a scope of an area that is 180 degrees, more or less. But if we talk inland, it's 360. So we are doubling the scope of our areas to respond as well. So, and not to mention the rivers that you could have in that area as well, that may be spreading the oil even further. So larger areas, infrastructure, local knowledge. It's complex, and maybe that links to the, again, exercising and preparedness, definitely.
Great, thank you. So just going back to the case studies, the examples are interesting because they show that these initiatives are being triggered in different ways by different stakeholders. So I'm just curious, are we seeing a trend in terms of how or which stakeholders are initiating these activities? And is there a sort of recipe, or is there a way that we can ensure that they do sustain? Are there barriers that you see where, maybe something happens and then it's really hard to keep it going? So I guess coming back to you, Monica, do you see trends in that? Well, you've obviously been involved in quite a few of these country initiatives lately, so.
So it was actually funny when Laura and I were discussing this beforehand. The first thought that always comes to mind is 2 reasons. One, there's a spill, and then people panic, and then that's normally triggers the discussion. Or 2, there's an activity that's about to happen. So there's an exploration that needs to happen. There's a project that needs to happen. There's a pressure. There's some sort of external driver that's pushing it. Or it's, we're trying to tick some check box of making sure that we have covered our wildlife component of our ESIA, because it says in there that we need to look at wildlife. And sometimes it does feel a bit like that. Like we get good momentum, there's some funding, but then the activity passes, the spoil is cleaned up, the wildlife are rescued, rehabilitated, released, and then the conversation collapses because there's often no further carrot, there's no further push. And unless it's regulated, it becomes almost just like someone's got to champion it the whole time. And then people leave as well. You get a great contact in government and then they resign or they get shifted into another position and you got to start the process all over again.
So to come to you, Lauren, and I was just thinking just to add to that too, because the example in Nigeria was somewhat about the country requesting support from GI WACAF. And so just to add to that as well is do countries know that they can request support? And, is that an aspect that we can somehow motivate or promote?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think everyone in this room is raising awareness for all wildlife response and trying to integrate it. There's the word again, integrate it again into the wider spill response. And so I think we can keep doing that messaging and keep putting that pressure on from our different aspects. But I do want to reiterate what Monica just said about that continuity of contact is so, so key. We find it everywhere. It is not specific to Africa that we have these issues. We have it globally. But if you lose that contact, as we know, you're not only losing that experience and all of that workshop and facilitating that you've done before, but you're losing in the case of wildlife, the perception of the fact that we need to do it, right? So it's hard when you're thinking about oil spills in particular, but when you refine that to wildlife and you lose that contact who really gets that we need to have this as a conversation, and you're starting from zero again, it really does slow progress up very, very well. And the other thing I wanted to reiterate with that Nigeria case study that the government themselves asked for it was that when you have government buy-in, it's great because there's clearly motivation. Whatever source of that motivation it is, they want to get this output done. And in that case, it was a contingency plan. So that's fantastic because you're not trying to push a boulder up the wall. You're working with someone who already has that buy-in. But what we often encounter is that typically means we're working to internal guidelines. And that's where GI and other regional collaborators really help to push that momentum forward. Because if GI WACAF are saying, we'll put this workshop on, but we want to see some kind of progress by the end of the year, that really helps to facilitate. We all know if you give yourself a deadline or you give your colleague a deadline, it tends to slip a little bit more than if it was an external collaborator. And it's the same when we're talking about wildlife.
Tanya, you want to say something on that?
If I may add some on what triggers preparedness in the region. I talked about the communication and network. So we have a 2-year cycle conferences, but in the middle of those conferences, we do a lot of virtual networking with the delegates, national delegates and industry focal points. And the main agenda of those touch points is sharing whatever you guys are doing in your country. And it's not about competitiveness, but share best practices. And someone from other country would say, oh, I think we can do this too. How you did it? And then it starts to raise the awareness and the understanding that they can get assistance from the GI WACAF project and from the industry and from the international technical advisors. So this is how we kind of raise awareness and the need from countries to start building their capabilities.
Thank you very much. And it's a good segue, I think, into this next theme, which is about integration and implementation. I remember it was a conversation with one of the other GIs where I think there's so much focus on trying to ratify conventions and, sort of improve oil spill preparedness within countries. So they said to me, wildlife preparedness often is like the last to be invited to the dance. It's like somehow there's always this, well, we've got these other priorities first. We want to do it, we just haven't got to it yet. So integration has been this theme. How can we actually not get it front and center, but get it incorporated into all these other activities? So it's not a do later, but it's a do with and do, as at the same time almost. So Daniela, do you have thoughts about that?
One of the things that we have to reinforce or make them realize is that if they prepare, it's not just because of the wildlife, they prepare for themselves as well. You know how much the impact is, the social impact of having oiled birds on a shoreline. I mean, that is something that is just there for them. I mean, it's a social impact. It's citizens will get mobilized, and depending on which country, you will get more or less people, but people will get into that shoreline collecting the animals. You will get the social media there. You will get that picture of the oiled bird or the oil seal or whatever into the media, and that is your reputation. It's the reputation of your country. So they have to be convinced that they are not doing it just because of the wildlife and saving the animals. They are also doing it to show that they care and that they can do something about it. So I think that's one of the key things. The other thing, I think Tanya was explaining about the GWACAF structure, the tools they have. I think it's there to be used, and I think it's there to be, powerfully used bit more. So I think more than just raising awareness on those activities, we have to do meaningful exercises to really make the point that we have to do something as well. And I think that's key. And integrating wildlife, there are levels and levels of integrating wildlife. So we've seen wildlife national contingency plans or industries contingency plans where they say, yeah, we integrated wildlife. You go, you flick through, yes, there is a paragraph, 6 lines about wildlife. No, that's not integration. So integration means experts supporting you to put that information forward, that preparedness together with those that know about it and having it there to be used and to, when you say integrating means also implementing. So it also means exercises. It also means training. So it all goes together, integrate, but also implement. So it's a wheel in a way. So yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to reinforce that often that paragraph, if you find it in the contingency plan, says call SANCOB or I don't know, we had this morning. We I think in the Australian contingency plan, it was ask the state they should maybe have a plan. But it's not integrated. It's not helpful. And as we all know, when an incident kicks off and we need to know a little bit more than that and how to actually get our responders out, that falls short. So yes, exercise.
Thank you. Tanya, you've got something to add to that?
The piece that has been focused on the last regional conference is the word operationalization. So taking from the paper and putting on the ground, moving. So there was a lot of discussion on, we have good plans, we have good procedures, following international standards and conventions, but we need to make sure that we can take those pieces and actions from the paper to the ground and make sure that they work. A phone call, you have a list of emergency contacts, and we know governments, African government, they change a lot. The number you called 1 year ago might be the same number you will have to call 1 year after. So make sure you really practice those processes and standards.
Thank you. Monica, I'm going to bring you into this one as well, just with one last part of this, which you talked about international standards. The whole of the last session was about all the developments at an international level. What is the role that the international expertise can play in supporting some of this?
I think it's building that tier 1 and tier 2 capacity, right? I think I've heard a lot of discussion around this, and I think everyone acknowledges it, that we don't want the perception to be that, tier 3 is the button that you push when you need it and the response is going to fall out the sky, fix everything, leave, and then we're golden. It can take time. It can take, I did a project recently where it would take at least a week to get equipment and people onto site. A lot of damage can happen in a week of a spill, especially when it's right near your shoreline and it's in the middle of the breeding season and turtles are coming to nest on your beach, and now you've got locals running around doing their absolute best because they care and they want to help, but not able to do much because they haven't had the training. So I think there's a real scope for bringing that really encouraging that building of tier 1 and tier 2 capacity. And that comes from, and I'll add this as sort of my parting sentence under this topic, that wildlife needs to be considered as, under oil spill response, wildlife should not constantly be segregated. And it needs to form part of that first planning phase. As much as you plan your use of dispersants, as much as you plan your use of shoreline cleaning, wildlife should be right there in your progress.
Thank you, Monica. Great point. Thank you all for the comments on that. Moving on to our fifth theme here, which is more of that socioeconomic context, cultural realities of just, how does wildlife response and preparedness fit in with other priorities within a country? And I think, just thinking about that within Africa, I think the question is how do socioeconomic challenges affect wildlife response prioritization? I think there's different reasons to be prepared. There's maybe different motivations. So I think the question is really how can we frame wildlife response in a meaningful and appropriate way in Africa? I guess that puts it within that both a sort of wildlife and human context. So Tanya, do you want to go to you first?
Yeah, so it is evident there is a lack of funds, resources, living conditions that will create this human-wildlife conflict. And it can be conflict for land, conflict for food. There are some places that there is an increase in urbanization, building new cities, and there will be this wildlife conflict. Should I keep those animals? How I don't have ways to keep myself? How I gonna create conditions to also accommodate or preserve or conserve those animals? So those are some of the conflicts between wildlife and humans in our region. Also governments, politics, and make sure that they include those wildlife conservations and protection within their economy diversity, and start to have the conversation with the locals with some inclusion, making sure that they understand those wildlife can be beneficial for them. It can be a tourism industry development. It can be a balance between food scarcity or climate change situation that they can balance and make sure that they take advantage of those situations and create new opportunity for grow social economic opportunities.
Thank you, Tanya. Monica, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to say, I think, I've had people ask me questions like, how can you insist on access to fresh water when we don't even have fresh water to drink for washing a bird? And, it really made me think and reflect on, what am I doing in the training I'm giving and the needs of these people, and how do we put it into a point of view, and we have best practice and global standards, and we want to aspire to those, but to really understand the needs on that ground level. And I find it amazing that when you encourage people to talk and you listen to what they got to say and you look at ways to bring them into the conversation, how they responded to it, and how you explore what is available in their region and connect to what they could still do, that people really rallied around it. And you, as Tanya mentioned, you found the value add, the context around the income, tourism, fishing, for example, is very relevant to many communities and the impact that could have and how you can bring that in. But then also acknowledging that, we had this in Nigeria where they said to us, if there was an oil spill and wildlife were affected, they would catch the birds and try and eat them. Not joking, full of oil. And we both were like horrified, but that's not our reality, that's their reality. So we need to work with local communities to help address that cultural perception as well, instead of just bulldozing in with our belief.
You have to be reasonable as well, because you need them on your side, because otherwise you won't be able to do anything. So that's key as well.
So thank you. And this is our final theme. I'm conscious of the time, so it was probably our last round, and we'll go through everyone for this one. But we've obviously focused mostly, and I think rightly so, on Africa. But one of the questions is, is this unique? Is what we are facing in terms of challenges in Africa with wildlife response preparedness? Are we seeing it elsewhere? And I think what is that telling us as a community gathered here about what the priorities need to be for the future? When we leave this conference, we're not going to be back together for another 3 years, but what do we see as really those priorities for us as a community to keep driving this forward, whether that's in Africa or whether that's in the wider region? So, Daniela, I'll come to you first on this and we'll come this way.
I think it's not unique. I mean, the remoteness that we have in Africa, the lack of resources, the everything, the biodiversity, we have got many other places in the world that are facing the same. So I don't think it's unique. Doesn't mean that it shouldn't be focused, but it is not unique. And I think have been discussing all this week as well is that tier 1 and tier 2 resources and preparedness is key as well to be able to respond. So we need to focus on that. How? There are tools, I think. Some of them were presented. But yeah, let's try to work to, again, is the collaboration word, et cetera. But yeah, GeoWACAF it's a tool that could be used, especially in Africa, to expand on that preparedness. Industry joining together in pairs, in trios, whatever you want, but industry are doing their explorations and their activities in many similar countries. So why don't they join together and do something together? I think that's also an important thing that might need to be highlighted.
Because what Daniela said, it's not uncommon. I've heard and had numerous discussions with colleagues over the week about challenges they face, and even in countries that have considerably more resources, it can still be a big barrier. Even in countries where we would say, you should know better, they don't always know better. And so I think it's also, a message that, again, that whole theme that's come through this week about collaboration, cooperation, and it really goes a long way when people unify behind a cause and a voice. And as I mentioned earlier on, it's that shift in that narrative that wildlife was separate and bringing wildlife into the conversation consistently. And many people in this room have been sounding that horn for many, many years. And it's now finding those leverage points where we can really start to see that starting to, actually happening and taking that opportunity to come together, as Daniela said, and get industry involved in joint projects, get that exercise, have an exercise with a wildlife focus, only maybe as a starting point. If you look at exploration, have your plan with wildlife from the start, and already that will start shifting the dial.
Yep, I will reiterate, but concisely in a slightly different way. I think, look, Africa has always been a continent for change, for progression. It's always been at that cornerstone, and I think today is no different. We're seeing it progressing with different types of exploration and vessel traffic, and we've got the old fields, but it is not unique to Africa. I would say Southeast Asia in particular is facing the same increase in vessel traffic, maybe a bigger increase in the number of dark fleet going around because of politics in that region. And so what I would say is keep our eyes on the horizon, because we might have lessons learned from other regions that Africa can very quickly use and adapt. So you're not alone in this in Africa. There are other areas that are doing it, facing the same struggles. And if there is an incident and it happens to be in Southeast Asia, perhaps we can learn from it before it happens here. And then the other thing about how to really change this, I think it's just taking a organization or personal objective out of this to talk about wildlife response at every single engagement that you go to from here. And that's more for the platform that's, for instance, Tanya or myself or others have, where we're speaking to non-wildlife responders, right? That message needs to get out into the mainstream industry. So that's what I'm going to try and take away from here.
Yeah, so GeoWACAF, it's setting the platform to create a national capability first. So we're talking about tier 1, tier 2. And then the third stage is those cross boundaries, regional, national cooperation and collaboration. Those type of conference definitely help to raise awareness and create this network. And being the current GI WCAF chair, I had a conversation with my dear Stel and Stella from the South Africa government, and we just like, we don't need to be big. We can start small. We don't need to do international conferences. We can do regional, virtual. Benguela Convention, wildlife workshop, conference. Let's start small. Let's hear concerns for people about the subject. Let's hear from them what we have to put on the table as a solution, and bring them to be part of the solution. So this is what I'm getting and taking from this conference for during this week, and I inspired you, and I have inspired you to continue this conversation and building awareness for wildlife response and protection.
We have. And if I just, as I bring this to a close, I think just reflecting again at the fact that we started talking about the treasure, this monumental rescue effort 25 years ago, but sitting through the presentations over the last 3 days, I'm really reminded about the monumental development since then. You know, I think just to appreciate the conscious effort to really design systems and to create stakeholder engagement, to develop these country models and to communicate and share, you know, what's working, what isn't. I see that there has been that development, and I would say certainly the model in GI WCAF is really setting a great example. I would say that hopefully we can replicate in other regions. And I think certainly the community of practice, which has been mentioned a few times, is at least one mechanism where we're trying to encourage, certainly from an industry perspective and other stakeholders to share their experiences of this. Nobody has the sort of magic recipe, but sharing the experiences. But it does seem like it's a conversation that it just needs to have everybody involved. And I love this idea of bringing it up at every opportunity. So that's your call to action when you leave this room. We're the only thing standing between the end of the conference and whatever you're doing next. I just lost the slides, but I just really want to end by saying a huge thank you to the panelists today, to Daniela, Monica, Lauren, and Tanya, for offering their expertise. Thank you very much for staying with us. And yeah, we wish you all safe travels from here, but thank you very much.